for another episode of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we will be reviewing the cult classic film Absentia. This was Mike Flanagan's first film. This came back. This movie aired back in 2011, and how I heard of this film, or why I decided to for this week, it was my choice to pick the film. I had recently finished watching his two. This is the director Mike Flanagan's two Netflix series. The last of which was The Haunting at Bly Manor on Netflix. And so I was kind of curious, and we had not touched upon a film in the horror genre specifically. So I wanted to sort of dig into this director's past and see what sort of got him on the map. And this was his first film that he came out with. So yeah, with that sort of backdrop in mind, I'll sort of briefly outline some of the main plot of the film, and then we'll get more into it. So for some of the main plot, it deals with one of the main characters. Her name's Trisha, who's a pregnant woman living in Southern California, and the movie starts with her younger sister Callie, who's a former drug addict and who appears to be very religious within her Christian faith, or someone who has recently converted to Christianity, and that's, you can tell it really, as part of her character, it's what sort of holds and keeps her together. Her younger sister comes to visit her to help her go through the process of filing the official paperwork of declaring her husband, who's been missing for 7 years, as dead in absentia. So to actually make that process true in the legal aspect of the law. And around that time, things start to get a little strange, and you're also not really sure at first who could be the possible father of Trisha's unborn baby at this point, although that gets to be later revealed. And you end up realizing that a lot of weird things start happening around that time. Specifically, after some of the... at one point, his name's Detective Mallory, comes by the home to sort of check on them, and this is after the younger sister goes on a jog. She sees the detective there and begins to put two and two together that Detective Mallory is the one who is the husband. Or I'm sorry, he's not the husband. Yeah, she's the father of the unborn child. And so, you know, things start to be sort of progressing because Trisha files the official paperwork to declare her husband dead. Things seem to be getting back to normal. It seems like she, her life is sort of moving forward. And she decides to ask the detective out on a formal date for real, because she's sort of gotten past the point of sort of realizing that her husband's in all actuality dead. But just as they're about to go out on a date, her husband ends up seemingly coming back from the dead. And he's there, and he's in shock. It's evident based on the hospital reports that he's been tortured, although he really won't say where he was. But it's revealed that essentially the tunnel, which becomes a central location of this movie, is a very dangerous spot where this creature lives, really in sort of an alternative dimension, if you will, that kidnapped Daniel years ago, and is essentially the creature that Daniel fears of a lot. And so this movie gets kind of interesting, because what ends up happening is, just as soon as Daniel comes back into Trisha's life, it was just as quickly that he's taken back away from the creature. And so it's no one really believes the younger sister, Callie, because it turns out that she's actually has done drugs or kept drugs in the house. So they think she's hallucinated the whole kidnapping sequence by the creature. And so none of them believe her, but she's convinced of what she saw. She knows what she saw, and she tries to convince her sister that what really happened, although her sister doesn't really believe her at first. It's not until later on her sister ends up getting essentially taken by the monster that Trisha believes her at that point, right? Because she's taken to the other world in the tunnel. But the cops at this point are very suspicious, and they think that something has happened to Callie, or that Callie is in some way responsible for the disappearances of the two. And what ends up happening is that Callie goes to the tunnel, essentially after being interrogated by the police, and tries to make a trade, that meaning to give herself for her sister. But unknowingly for her, she didn't really specify the exact agreements of the trade. And so the creature ends up giving back the unborn fetus in exchange for Callie. And so what ends up happening is they both are stuck in this underworld with the creature, and that's sort of how the movie ends, despite the detectives' sort of hopes and searches for them. So that's sort of a general synopsis. There's a couple of scenes that I didn't quite touch upon within the sequence of the recap, but we'll certainly get into them. So I wanted to sort of ask you what it was were your initial thoughts on the film?
Yeah, I think so. This movie, first of all, it takes place in Burbank, California, which is an interesting setting.
It's actually Glendale.
Oh, Glendale. Where is that actually? Do you know?
Yeah. It's right next to Burbank. It's basically right next to Burbank.
Okay. Yeah,
it's not,
you're right,
not too far away from where I believe UCLA is.
Okay, yeah, I guess they're like smack dab together, and like I don't want to get into a history lesson of how LA really is a combination of basically all these cities, but
giant suburb.
Yeah, that's the joke, right? It's a giant suburb because like is it really LA or is it just like smashed up together?
Oh, I'm from Los Angeles. Are you really from Los Angeles, or are you from one of the like 300 cities around Los Angeles?
Exactly.
Sorry, that's sort of our running joke. We both grew up in Northern California and met plenty of people from Southern California. But anyway,
and then
so what were your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, so that's how I was going to get started. I found the setting to be a bit unique, just because I don't often see a horror film based basically in a everyday neighborhood. Like, they usually have a house, or if it's like a neighborhood, it's like, I'm thinking of I forgot what that movie is, where it's like a famous horror film with I forgot the name. I'll think of it later. But basically, like, horror films are set in like either the woods or like in a real suburb, right, where there's not a lot of people. There's like, it seems like there's only 5 houses on the block,
or a creepy motel, aka Psycho.
Yeah, or a creepy motel, exactly. So I did find like the setting to be a bit unique and that's something I did like, that it jumped at me immediately. I think, unfortunately, like I'll split it between part A and part B. The first half of the film, I did feel it was kind of like I didn't know where it was kind of going. Like you knew something was going to happen with the missing husband, right? Because you knew that something had to happen, right? But it was a slow burner in the beginning, right? They were introducing to you the characters, right? Like you mentioned, right? The detective with Trisha, and then Callie with her returning home, and she's like basically the main protagonist, right? Because she kind of starts the story. But I think as a whole, like, I want to get into the detail, but my high level is that this is one of those films where, like, I think we've been kind of getting a bit lucky with like directorial, like the director's debuts.
Directorial.
Yeah, debuts, because we've been spoiled where like they've been kind of like, imperfect, but like how do I say this? Imperfect, but like you could see like the rawness, like you could see like later what they iterated on, like just like, a couple tweaks to make it even better. I haven't seen the Netflix shows yet. I plan to get around to it, but I imagine that there was a jump. I imagine there was a little bit of a jump in terms of the writing, and also I'm not even going to say the budget. I'm going to nitpick the writing throughout this, but my initial thoughts were I found a lot of stuff kind of like I had to roll my eyes and go like, really, a cop would do this? Really, a character would do this? Like, and when I start wondering these kind of things, I'm like, ugh. The screenplay is probably a bit weak on this film. So I'm curious what you thought as a film as a whole before we go deep dive. But
so I'll just say a couple things. I will agree that at times the writing and some of the characters seemed it was lacking a bit. I thought they could have done a better job keeping sort of the script a little tighter, right? I thought that they made excellent use of some saturation in certain shots to sort of give interesting effects. Specifically, I'm talking about tunnel sequences when the younger sister Callie is running. You sort of see a lot of color sort of saturated, like you're coming from the light and everything's sort of overexposed. I thought those were some really good touches to try to really set certain scenes. And I also like the sort of creepy angles coming from the spider web as she's sort of running down. I thought he had really interesting camera angle choices, which I'll give him credit for because it made certain scenes a little more uncomfortable. I thought that really where I think this director excels is sort of setting the mood, right? It's sort of like a slow burn. It's not like you're going to get overtly scared. It's just like you could see it kind of gives you a level of comfort at times. Really where I thought he excelled a lot was how creepy there were a couple of sequences in the bathroom I'm thinking of where she's either getting in there and you sort of see sort of her coming in the dark, and then you see like another figure and you're like, oh God, like I couldn't tell if it was like the creature or it was her, and then she turns on and it's just her in the mirror. I thought he had some really good choices of just shooting certain scenes that really sort of added to some unsettling effects. I thought the idea of having the shower curtain kind of move and get back, like that was one of the creepiest bathrooms I've seen in a while in a film. That was just me personally. It was a little unsettling. So I thought certain tricks like that, I'll give him a lot of credit. I thought he did a really good job setting the mood in this movie. You may disagree. You may push back on that.
I would say like the mood, like I think it was consistent. I will say this to agree with you. So where I will agree is the bathroom scenes were the best scenes in this movie. I thought they were, like you said, well shot. It got you kind of like a little amped, and it kind of like because I think the horror films have to thread the needle is like increase your anticipation, but also you don't want to know, right? Like you want to know what's behind the curtain, but you really maybe don't want to know, and they have to like it's like good horror.
Yeah, no, they got it. That's how I got it. Like I felt like I don't know if you're talking about like you remember she's brushing her teeth or like she sees the little silver bug, kills it in the sink, and then she kind of feels like I felt like that too in my bathroom like once or twice before where you feel like some wind. It's like you look back like oh no, there's nothing there. And so like I thought he did a good job building up tension in some of those sequences. The other shot that I thought that was fantastic in this film because it really did creep me out a bit was when Trisha was about to get taken, right? And they're both on the stairwell, sort of going up, and you hear the noises, and it's straight pitch black. For some reason, I was like, wow, that was a really good choice because it did creep me out a bit.
And well, that's where I will say like those were, in my opinion, at least in my take, the strong points of the film. And like I said, we'll get to the nitpicking later, but like to flip it, right? Those are like, let's say like good points. Like I give
those are the best, some of the best moments of the film for sure.
Yeah, and then that's why I say it's kind of interesting how like then you go to like some cop, this is not in the order, but you'll go to like another scene where like the detective is either talking to Trisha or they're in the like interview room, and you're like, wow, like did they write this behind a kitchen napkin? Like, this is kind of rough, but it's interesting in that regard.
I think I
see where like why he's making Netflix shows because like you said when it comes to like the I want to reiterate your point about like how he frames the shot just to give you like an angle where you, like I said, you do feel like, oh, I wish I could, if only I could see behind this, or if it was just tilted, but like, it's on purpose where he has the shot.
Is that so? I'll give him credit, and that's where I dislike some of the more mainstream horror genre in general. Is they give you sort of cheap scares, right? Where it's just a little quick jump, something sort of like that, and there's a certain art of just making a situation very tense in the unknown. And I think he did a really good job at times in this. And he did that in his Netflix shows for the most part. I thought his first show, I think it was Haunting at House Hill, really did that. Bly Manor, not quite as much. But yeah, so like sort of building the tension in the scene, I think is a really good art in this sort of genre. And I for the most part, I thought he did some pretty good job in certain sequences in this film. I mean, yeah, we could talk about some of the screenplay and how some of the writing's a little cliche, and it just wasn't that strong. But for the most part, I'll give him credit for some of these. Like for it being his first film, being $70,000 budget, and I think that may have been where it really hurt sort of some of the writing is he's just like, we couldn't shoot certain scenes. It might have run over. I know when we reviewed Primer, that happened to the director. He's like, I barely have enough footage.
Yeah, but
go ahead. You want to say something?
I'm happy you brought this up because this is another thought I had was his strength is And again, I want to watch the Netflix shows, but I feel like if I'm a betting man, his strength is like camera work and also, like you said, cinematography.
100%. Yeah,
And I think when it comes to low budget, I think if the directors are
that
good,
hurts.
that hurts. No. I say what his strength isn't screenplay writing, because with Primer, right? He wrote the script too, right? And I think obviously,
Mm-hmm.
we all can start a blog, right? So if you're at least a decent, let's say a decent level like screenplay writer, like you say, you can do both hats, right? I feel like with him, again, maybe I'm giving like too harsh of a critic, but at least with this film, I feel like if you had, like you said, if you had the budget to pay maybe like a real like a screenwriter with more experience, or who could help craft his ideas on screen, it would have executed a lot better. But like a lot of these other low budget ones we've done, I've noticed that like, and it's hit me while we're
The
watching,
writing's very good.
and it's because I think they're able to play both hats, director and writer. And I think that when you're like starting out, that helps you a lot, because often you have to cut costs, right? And sometimes it's in the editing room, sometimes it's in the the camera, like camera technology I have. But often what we don't, like, to give a shout out to screenplay writers, often we don't recognize that sometimes they cut like writers, and you're left
Some
with
of the writing, yeah.
you're left with like doing it yourself. If you're good enough, you execute on it. But other times they find somebody who will take the job, and the execution is unfortunately what it is, right? Like they don't probably have the experience, or they just they're not used to working on a movie. So I think that's where this film, I bet you, the screenplay, whoever wrote it, it was either a bunch of people, because sometimes it did feel like it was a bunch of people, but it might have just been one person who was just taking a shot at it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think actually he did write it. So maybe if he did like write it,
he did write it. Yeah, Mike Flanagan was the screenwriter.
yeah. So I don't know if he wrote the shows too, but if he did, he probably improved. But I imagine, because TV shows it's harder to write those. I bet you he had help a little bit, but
right. I will say the writing in, especially Hounding on House Hill, was very good.
Yeah, and it's TV. So what I do know about TV is that like writers take turns. So it's very rare that a TV show has the same writer from episode 1 to 10. You'll see that like often, like let's take any show, right?
Yeah.
Let's take even the Wire, right? You might have a head writer, but you have all these other writers who are doing all the like maybe the nitty gritty work.
Okay, let's. The Wire is a very special case because they also brought in like 8 different writers that were authors in crime thrillers to be consultants. So it's a very unique situation.
Okay, let's take a different show that's more like, let's say, lower quality. Like let's like Friends, right? If you look at the Friends credits, you'll often see that like it's a different writer every like 2 episodes. So I think with TV there's a bit of a different structure, where film is usually like 1 or 2 people, or like when we did Sunshine, we know the screenwriter, right? We know that like his name's on this. Like if it's like, yeah, he might not be directing it, and like he doesn't have all the controls, but the screenplay is probably the second most important thing, in terms of like the infrastructure of a film, right? The acting obviously is important, and the director is obviously the most important, but the screenplay is probably like right there in like that third tier of like, if the screenplay is bad, you're gonna have the best producers, you're gonna have the best director, you're gonna have like the best actors, and it won't matter. So I think that was a little tangent there, but I think it's interesting how like a screenplays, especially as you get better, you start noticing over time, like it does make an impact. It is it's like with anything, right? Your first go around, you're going to make mistakes. So, and like even the movies we did before, they obviously admitted that there was things that they look back and they're like, I was just so naive,
Yeah. The one thing I will say that I thought where one of the weaker points, maybe it was because I just didn't get quite the reaction that you usually expect from this sort of genre. I thought a lot of the sort of what do you call them, like aberrations, where she thinks she's seeing her husband, but then looks back and really doesn't. I thought that got over. Like there were too many sequences where I think it was just unnecessary. It was kind of like overdone or overused.
Yeah,
that was my personal.
To go off that point, I think what hooked me in the second part of the film, when we get into that, is I was curious about like the open questions around the monster, versus like, maybe in a normal horror film, like, oh, I'm so scared of them. Like I was actually more curious about learning more about the monster than I was, oh, I'm scared of the monster, right? So I wanted his mythology, I wanted more of his background, versus like, oh my goodness, I hope like the monster doesn't show up. I wasn't actually like I have seen other films like Hereditary where like I'm genuinely like I can't have trouble sleeping a little.
I haven't seen that movie, so.
But there's other horror films, right? Where like I've watched and I'm like, oh, like that was a bit scary because it's like,
dude. And I've talked to several people who've seen Hereditary. They all say they're like that first night was a little rough trying to sleep.
What's interesting is that movie. Just I'm not gonna give spoilers here, but it's interesting how like I was watching that movie and I was just like, oh, this is overrated and like it's not that bad, and then like it turns and you're like, what am I watching, dude? like oh my goodness, dude, this did like it went from like, oh, we're gonna be like a 7 out of 10 to like we're gonna ramp you up to 11. Now I'm like, wait, it's like when the roller coaster, you're like, oh, this first one isn't so bad, and then you're like, wait, this is,
and then it's a big one comes,
and you're like, wait a second, I didn't sign up for this. Well, maybe eventually we'll do that movie, but it's those are like the horror films I think of. That's a recent one, but there's other horror films where like that's how they get you, right? Like they find this thin needle where there's a story, there's a plot, but there's also these moments of like, oh, what the heck am I watching? I'm freaking out a little bit.
So I would say it's that sort of fine line because I've also seen a lot of more mainstream horror films. I'm thinking of. What's a really bad one? Annabelle or The Conjuring, where it's just like they use some of the same cheap tactics, and there's nothing really more to it, if anything, to the storyline. Whereas, like at least with this sort of genre, they're not going to try to get you scared, and they're going to more try to set the mood or make you more uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think that's the trick now.
There's a difference between the genres.
Yeah, I think the trick now, because I think horrors it's one of the more popular. If you go by like sales and also like who goes to the movies at what like time of year, horror is still like top 3. Like people love going to horror films, and I think to your point, I think we're seeing a lot of like companies just churn them out and milk it. Versus like I think
how many more Conjurings are they going to make?
Yeah, versus like a good horror film, like you said, walks this fine line of like the cinematography of being a horror film, but also that kind of like psychological, like messing with your mind as you're watching it, and it's hard. Those are movies they don't just, they make a good one. You can't just flip the switch, right? Like,
no.
Like it's harder to make those type of movies than it is to say, oh, I'm going to make a good, solid biopic, right? We have a lot of those, and those are like pretty much like, let's say, unless it's really bad, they're pretty much like they're always the same kind of quality, right? If you have a good director, a good writer, like a biopic on let's say a president or author or whatever, versus like a horror film where I think you have to have a little more creativity. I think that's why it's a bit harder, but that's why the payoff is so big when it's good. So
very hard, yeah, and that's why I was saying this is like one of the hardest genres to, I would say, write for. I was kind of curious, what did you think of the two sisters, the acting of the two sisters?
I didn't think their performances were terrible. I preferred the drug addict sister. What's her name again? Callie?
Yeah, I like the younger sister. She was actually very good to me.
Yeah, I thought she did a really like a good performance. I liked her throughout the movie. I even the other sister didn't bother me as much, but I did.
She wasn't that bad. More the cops really kind of annoyed me. I don't know why.
We're gonna get there because I feel like most of my gripes with this movie is the cops. I was just like first like the cops, the acting is like over the place. Also, are they cops? They're written as if like I was the cop. Like, oh, I'm making all these assumptions in the get-go. It's clearly this is the case. I was like, you're not following any of the evidence. Like, you gotta make this believable, man. That's the whole point. I know it's a movie, but these cops didn't like act like cops. They act like I hired like a private investigator.
And then they still like really they keep the dude who has like so many conflicts of interest with this woman like on the case. That would never happen.
Yeah.
So you got to suspend those sort of beliefs.
Yeah, but I'm just you're saying suspend, but I think this is like really suspending because this is like pushing my like limits of like. It gets to the point where it's just like there were certain things that they could have changed in the script writing that would have made it pretty believable, and really I would think excelled this to like a more top tier in our minds. At least that's how I felt about it. If you cleaned up. It was a little more polished up in certain areas. This would have been a very, very good film to me. I can agree. I think if they cleaned up the writing, it would have gone probably 3 or 4 points higher from when I get to my score would have been. I think the cop thing also would really. So this is the topic I was hinting at you before we got recording. and this relates because there's been a lot of we had recent elections and there's been some drug laws that have changed. I found it really
hold on.
frustrating.
Were you annoyed by both the cops? Before you go in, were you?
Both the cops for different reasons.
Okay. What were your reasons, or what were your gripes with each cop before you get into your question?
Oh, okay. With what's his name? The boyfriend cop, Malroy.
Okay, yeah, the bigger guy. Sure, Malroy.
Yeah. My issue with him was like, I don't know. Like first, I didn't think his performance was that strong. Like it seems like sometimes like he was really pushing his lines. Like he went from like I'm this obsessive caring boyfriend. Like think of the scene where he's questioning Daniel, right? Like how can you not remember where you were? Somebody fed you. You're lying. I was just like, is this a cop or is this just like a jealous boyfriend? Dude, like I know that's what his role was, but I was just like,
well, he was a jealous boyfriend though.
Yeah, and then like but like I think even like you know how cops are trained, like even like we've had other episodes we talked about cops, but even in this situation, I feel like the cop would have just he would have been assertive, but he wouldn't have. It was just like so over the top, right? Like it was like to me, it was like
over the top. Yeah,
over the top. That's the word I was looking for. Other than that, like I can't see. That's the problem. I don't know what the balance is, right? Like, is it his performance or was it the writing? Because sometimes a good actor or a decent actor just gets hosed by the writing, right? Right. We see this often. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think he's big name enough where I can compare him to another film. And be like, oh, look, with the right writing, this guy is a gem. So like,
yeah, I don't know like what his other film career has been.
Yeah,
so I can't point to another example.
With the other cop, my issue with him was like
that's Detective Lonergan in the.
Yeah, the one with the glasses. Yeah.
Yeah, Lonergan.
So with him, I think it was more the writing for sure. Even though I wasn't really like sold on his performance, but like he kept like he was the cop that kept jumping to the conclusions, right? Like with no like not even following the evidence or pretending to follow. Like I understand like some cops might do that, but I want to get to my point where I just find it really like kind of infuriating when like his immediate thought to anything that Callie said was, "Oh, you're on drugs." I was just like, this is so before we went live, this was the point that really got me that I want to talk about is that like we as a society we need to stop with just assuming because you're on drugs or let's say you have some addiction issues. That immediately invalidates anything you potentially thought or saw. Like it was automatically like the thing he used. Oh, you're on drugs. You can't believe you. It was probably you were somehow involved in why they disappeared. When all the evidence was like, how was she implicated? Like I was like, cop, do your job, dude. Like I was just like, this writing is so trash. like this is an injustice to like the victim too. Like I was just like, no, like this is even if she's on drugs, it doesn't explain anything she's explaining to you. Like how does they disappear like that, right? They just run off. A pregnant lady just runs off and that's the other thing when we get to the end where like he's like, oh, I think she's like living, she just wanted to get away. I was like, that's such wish fulfilled. Like, what would let you believe that, dude? Like, it's terrible. But anyways, what are your thoughts on the cops?
I'll get more to that because I'm going to push back on the end. It sounds like you were annoyed with the ending, and I will probably disagree with you a bit there. But anyway, I think that, like you said, the writing lacked, especially with the characters of the cops, and I will 100% agree with you there. I think what's evidence, I don't know about the careers of most of the actors, but I just looked it up. Turns out the person who played Detective Lonergan, his name's Justin Gordon, he's actually been in several films with Mike Flanagan since this movie, which makes me think that I think he liked his acting ability and like I think he thought that his acting ability sort of rose up where he would give him more parts as the director's career progressed as well. So I don't think it was necessarily his poor acting performance so much as it was the writing within the movie. Whereas I can't say the same for the dude who played Malroy. I didn't really find his character or even acting to be that great, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the thing is that if you're looking on Wikipedia, I have noticed that like Wikipedia is actually so when it comes to films, ironically, if you want like an actor's career, IMDb is sometimes more accurate. Like I looked up.
Yeah, I figured that.
The actress that plays Callie, she's actually in like you said, like you mentioned it, she's in other
Mike Flanagan movies.
And even outside of him too. She I mean, it looks like she's not.
She was good.
Like she's not like that's what I say. She was good, and she might not be in all like the A tier movies, but she's built like she's in things, right? Like either TV mini series or TV shorts or something like that. But with the other guy, like
his name's Dave Levine.
The Dave Levine, the cop. I think I didn't, like I said, he wasn't really part of my research before that we discussed this, but I can imagine that
Right.
he's not in a lot. I will say that. If I was a betting man, I imagine that he's not in like a lot of like things, and I bet maybe he has gaps where like he hasn't worked for 2 years, you know.
He has
But
not worked. It seems like his last major film was the second Mike Flanagan movie, but he hasn't been in another one since.
yeah, so to your point, I think by just looking at the track records, I think the one of the cops and then the cops like you said Lonergan or the guy with the glasses
Lonergan, yeah.
Lonergan. Those guys, I could see, like, to your point, that they were able to, you know, progress, right? And I don't want to like
Right.
be too, I don't want to be too harsh because, you know, acting is tough and like it's not for everybody and stuff. But that's why I do feel like sometimes like I tend to blame the screenwriter a little bit more because they're, you know, behind the scenes. But I will say that, like, yeah, I agree with your points there. Like, I think this movie, like, maybe that's what's frustrating, right? Is that this movie was another movie that if it just had a little bit more oomph, like either money or tweaks, it would have been like a really, really solid watch. You know what I mean? Like, I think I can agree on
Mm-hmm.
that point.
100% agree with you. Anyway, so let's go back to your point where you're saying you were talking about how you were annoyed that society kind of just rides off any sort of credibility when it comes to people who have done drugs. You want to
Yeah.
elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, you see it in the movie excessively, like with, you know, with Callie. But I think in
Mm-hmm.
general, I think people like know, like, when you interact in society, that like if somebody has like an addiction problem, whether that's drugs or alcohol, that sometimes they're just dismissed like as like damaged goods, right? Like this police situation was pretty obvious that they had their biases from the get go. That like whatever, even if she told them like, "Oh, I found $1 million," they would be like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think even in everyday society, we see this where there's a stigma to either getting help or even admitting you have a problem because, you know, people think that you're just, you know, you're not reliable. You know, you're, like you said, damaged goods, right? And even people who are like recreational, right? Like let's say they go to like a Burning Man, right? And they do a lot of shrooms. You know, obviously within that community they're embraced, but a lot of other people are like, wow, this guy is just he's not taking life seriously. Like there's this stigmas, right? Like
Sure.
if you go to a rave, right, and you're doing designer drugs, right, and you openly admit that, like, to your employer or to your, even let's say other family members, they're gonna look at you like, well, I'm not gonna hire a person that's tripping all the time,
Uh,
you know?
yeah, so what I will say is it's still taboo within our society. And I think you're having some pushback as it shouldn't necessarily be that way. And to an extent, I do agree. It's like if you sort of talk to some people who are like fervent anti-drugs in all cases, I would push back and say that there are even just non-recreationally, like medically speaking or clinically speaking, there's been a lot of studies done recently, even though it's been a hard fight trying to get funding for this type of research. But I think I've talked to you about this before. Say for shrooms, the active hallucinogenic ingredient, psilocybin, that's actually shown to be very effective in treating PTSD, depression, and to stop people from smoking. So that's why I was saying it shouldn't necessarily be viewed as so taboo when we don't fully understand it and could potentially be even beneficial in certain cases.
Yeah, I mean, my last point on this topic is, I understand if, like, let's say you know, you're trying to hire somebody to do like a mission to Mars and you don't want to take the risk, but the problem I have with, like, it's obviously part of the writing. I'm not going to blame like the movie, but it got me thinking about how like the police often, because they do this too, just like in the movie, where like they just jump to this conclusion, especially if it's in like somebody who, like, and we've seen other shows that it's similar dynamic, right? Like, I'm not just gonna, you know, single out this movie. They show up, they portray how the like police or society or people in power will perceive people who have, like, let's say addiction problems like her.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in this movie where like if they had just kind of like, you know, taken her a little more seriously. I'm not saying they would have uncovered the horror thing, but like they basically blamed her in the end, right? It was her fault, right? She was somehow connected to all this bad stuff because she reappeared and everything bad happened, right?
Right.
And I think I found that when I was watching, I know it was a movie, but I found that kind of frustrating because even though it's a horror film, I think that this happens a lot, right? Oh, all the bad thing is because this person has problems, you know? When it's
Yeah,
sometimes it's a little
so
more complicated depending on the situation, right?
I agree, but based on the writing, it could be assumed. I would say that her younger sister has burned Trisha before, and probably not once or twice, probably like it's been a habit. So because of that, you're already coming in with these negative. Like, I mean, I've heard stories, right, of people being like, yeah, I have this sort of drug member in the family. They sort of pop in once in a while, and they just want something, right, because they just need to get that high that they'll burn every bridge they can that is possibly there. And so I can, where you're pushing back on like they're jumping to conclusions, yeah, but you don't know what their personal relationship is with them and how many times they've necessarily been burned before. It sounds like it's been a lot.
But there's a difference always between family members and the police and people who are just there as a third party.
Right. But I'm talking about like even the sequence when Trisha doesn't believe what happened to when the husband disappears. Right, she jumps to conclusions. She's on acid.
To your point, yeah. When family members are burned, I put that in a separate category. I guess I was more frustrated when the police were pretty much acting like they were Trisha, and I was just like, but you have no history. You're like,
well, I think
except for that bias.
This cop. Is where. Yeah, in the bias cop, he's heavily influenced by what he's heard from the person he got pregnant, Trisha.
And this goes back to your earlier point, like why is he on the case? Again, that never made sense to me, but I ignore.
Yeah, no, that was beyond like all of this pushback on like how we treat drugs. More what would say is like, no, you have a personal connection to this. There's too much bias. You're off this case for bringing in someone new, someone who's not emotionally invested.
Yeah,
they probably would be asking more clear questions at that point.
Yeah. So,
that's really where I saw the lack of writing there.
Going back to the horror aspect of this film, what did you think of that like other sub storyline of the father, the missing father and his son, and then like even then they blamed they wanted to pin stuff on the son, right? Like the missing animals and stuff. What would you take of that whole storyline and that dynamic?
I think they just wanted to sort of have a cop out sort of. Well, I think they were there just to show that like they weren't the only ones that has happened to. That it's been this creature's been taking people away for really hundreds of years, based on the articles that Callie finds. But I think they're there to even prove that these cops, they always wanted to look for the short, easy answer without really doing any sort of digging or believing what might be really hard to believe. Right, and that way it's sort of like a faith, or you have to sort of dig into it more. Where I think people are easy to dismiss things that they just are out of the realm of comprehension. I think that was a big part of the film.
Yeah, I know you brought up like you wanted to talk about the religious aspect of this movie, but go ahead.
So what I will find interesting was more some of the dialogue when they're talking about their religious traditions that they sort of have followed or grown to need. Callie to help her with her addiction, right? And because she always prays, she has the cross, and she, having that sort of faith or belief in God really helps her through that. Whereas with Trisha, to try to get over and help her find peace amongst this tragic event of her husband disappearing, she turns to Buddhist meditation. It's really interesting when, or one of the scenes I found more interesting was when Callie goes and asks her about her meditation, or like what you really think about, right? And she's like, you try to detach yourself from any of the material things in this life that might lead you to bring suffering in the hopes that you find peace. She's like, that sounds very lonely. And I believe Trisha says something to the extent as like never underestimate the attraction of like oblivion. I was like, whoa, they're getting a little pretty deep with some of that nihilistic kind of outlook at that point. I wondered what your thoughts were on that sort of sequence.
Yeah, you're talking about when she enters the room and she's meditating, right? When she has the incense burning, right? And they have a little talk. And I like how the opening joke is like, she was like, this is what you do. Like, it was kind of funny. Yeah, I think that was one of the themes that like was trying to be injected by Flanagan in this film, was kind of like like you said, like the other world, like what is the spiritual world, right? This beast, like even though we don't get many answers around this like beast, right? Like, it's been around for a while, and it's basically been taking lives for decades, right? And I guess that's left to the viewer to like disseminate what does this monster represent, right? And I honestly I didn't have a
Hmm.
clear answer, but yeah, you see that and I think this is why horror films are kind of popular is because it does put in your mind because often I am not like a big horror movie buff, but I've often found that like in this psychological horror film genre, they tend to not want to answer these big questions because I think they leave it to the viewer to maybe kind
Try
of
to pick out.
try to pick it out that maybe there are things that we'll never be able to explain, right? Like there's a lot of like in this movie that's the same thing, right? How it ends even like it's basically like a cliffhanger, right? There's no sequel, so things continue,
Yeah.
right? But you don't know how their stories end, right? Like you don't know what the monster will do next, and when we get to the end, we'll discuss. But specifically with that scene, I think that's like the mystery of life kind of stuff, right? Like, oh, there is something, like I said, it could be like I said, dark, or there's nothing after this, or there's just like I said, this abyss, or oblivion, like you said earlier. But it also could just be like, I think Callie said something to Trisha about like, that line about like people suffer in this world so that they'll be happier in the afterlife, right? That's a very like,
Yeah. That was
um,
sort of the dark, or she was even talking about people who are just meant to be sacrifices within the Christian tradition. I was like, well,
yeah,
okay, sort of getting very dark with some of these taglines. What I did
yeah,
find interesting and what I did like in this film was, and I think that was just part of, I don't know whose choice it was to sort of add this in, but when they were sort of questioning, like even Callie or like what could have happened in their minds, they actually go through sort of the sequence of what happened, like her doing acid, hallucinating. After she's explained like what happened, and they're like no, and they go through the sort of filmmaking sequence of them trying to rationalize what had happened. And that also happens with sort of the disappearance when they show. There's a scene where you could tell they're coming up with the scenario, and I forgot what the kid's name is, but the son who was sacrificing the dogs, the animals, Lambert's son, he like is shown strangling Callie, even though that's not really what happened. But then it gets you to like sort of confused. It's sort of like I would say scenes like that, or when they show alternative sequences, it sort of throws you off your bearings a little bit.
yeah. And you know how earlier I was griping about how the cops jumped conclusions. It did
Uh-huh.
jump. It did cross my mind that maybe one of the themes is how people jump conclusions, and I guess the cops did this.
Yeah.
Trisha did this. Like every character basically did this, right? They jumped to some conclusion.
Yes.
Even when Callie was like showing her all the research she did, she was kind of jumping to the conclusion. Like
Yeah.
obviously we have
Dismissing her.
we have the perspective because we see the monster a lot, but like most people don't, right, in the film, right? So you can argue that like in their mind she was jumping conclusions. So it even crossed my mind that maybe that was one of the themes of this film,
Mm-hmm.
but I still have issues with the cop stuff. But um, I did cross my mind. So it's like you said, I didn't throw me off, but it got me thinking that direction of like, oh, that's
A
could be
little bit,
something
right?
that he's trying to push.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. But yeah, I just liked sort of the choice to include those scenes of like what they were sort of thinking happened. Um, yeah, I don't know. What else? Oh, I was kind of curious. I didn't know if I quite followed the storyline. So, what was your idea of what was going on within the sort of metal pieces that Callie kept finding, first on the front door and then secondly in her bed?
Yeah, that was so weird because I thought it was gonna connect later, but I didn't see anything obvious, right? Like it seemed like it was. I think my only theory is that it somehow relates to. So you know how she's jogging and she runs into Walter. I think it's Walter, right? Is the father, right?
Walter's son. Oh yeah, she runs into Walter at first. Yeah.
Yeah. So right, and they have an exchange, right? And he's in shock that she can, he sorry that she can
That
see
he can
him,
be
right?
seen. Yeah.
Yeah, and she like even like I almost because when I was watching it and I was thinking about the film, I wonder if like her saying like she has that line where, oh, don't worry, I'll come back and I'll give you food and
Uh huh.
we'll exchange, we'll don't worry, I'll help. And he's telling her not to leave him, et cetera, et cetera. I almost feel like was that the exchange that kind of triggered all the events. But anyways, going back to your question about the metal pieces that they found, like they called the police for. I do remember this scene. It's not clear, right? Like there's a lot of we can speculate. But I almost wonder if like that was like the monster kind of like first engaging with the family. Like that's the only thing I could think of, because it doesn't come back ever, right? It doesn't really connect again unless I miss
Yeah,
something.
you don't know if it's the monster, but then she brings back the metal, and I guess my question was her putting the metal in front of the tunnel, was that the first exchange to allow Daniel to come back?
That's what my theory was, that like she's the one that starts everything with
Initiated it, right?
yeah, and she doesn't realize that, but she's doing the trade thing. And that's why at the end, so maybe it does come back in the sense that she knows that she can do a trade, even though it doesn't go the way she thinks. But I think she thinks that she's like helping, but I think she unfortunately inadvertently sets off a bad chain of reactions for her and her family. But that's the only thing I can think of, because it seemed like Daniel was just never going to come back, right? Like the movie obviously has to exist, right? Like it has to have a storyline, right? But if the alternate world is almost like, okay, Daniel never comes back, they say he's dead, and then she starts her new life with the cop, right? And then Kylie comes back in and out, whatever, like to be there, and then to whatever, go travel or whatever. But obviously the ending is different. But it is interesting how like that's the only thing I can think of. I don't know if you have any better theories, but it just that was
No, I mean, I do agree with you there. Yeah, I'm trying to think, were there any other scenes that really stuck out to you?
No, we talked about the bathroom. I was gonna say that we should get to the ending. I think that's gonna be an interesting point of discussion. But before the ending, no,
I did like. So what I will say, creepily, I really liked, and we did rehash it. I liked the setting of the tunnel, just because it felt like sort of like an urban feel. Like, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've been through like sort of tunnels or similar sort of I guess walkways like that. They kind of seem like urban, but they're sort of kind of creepy, and they're like you don't know if like what's going to happen, if you're going to get jumped or stabbed. So I did like sort of that scene, and using a sort of urban tunnel like that, because you do get an unsettled feeling just from looking at it.
Yeah.
And I did.
Go ahead.
I did find that sequence with Callie. So we should get into that. So at one point, Callie sort of, she's distraught, and she wants her sister back, right? So she goes to the tunnel for a trade. The way that was shot, and how some of the lights started going out towards the ends of the tunnels, and you start to hear all the voices and sort of imagery of like footsteps or like handprints on the tunnel. I thought that was really cool and a really good, well shot sequence there.
Yeah, the ending of this movie, I think why it's probably has this cult following is the bathroom, obviously, but I think also this ending was like the entire sequence as a whole was pretty well done. I think even like you said, when she does the trade, even the aftermath, all that stuff was because even the hand at the end, like on her shoulder, that was like, oh, a bit creepy. But but yeah, the feet, like you said, that tunnel feet, what I call the fetus scene, was good. Yeah,
the fetus, I was like, oh, I did not see that coming. Wow, yeah, I was like, they went there.
I was like, you better start running. And she did. She did realize, like, wait, this trade isn't going to go the way I think. And nope.
Yeah, it kept it was a life for a life, but that was not quite the life she thought she was trading for.
Yeah, she thought it was going to be one of like, it's almost like she thought, Trisha would walk out and she would walk in. Nah, I think the monster had different ideas. Yeah.
Right. And so they trade. And I like the scene where she's running. It's very disorienting, and then you think she's gonna make it out of the tunnel, but alas, she doesn't. She gets pulled up in by the monster, and all you see is her Converse shoe. I thought that was a really cool scene too, just seeing the shoe left there.
Yeah, that sequence was good. I like I said, it's one of the stronger sequences in this film, and honestly, I didn't think she was gonna make it though. To be honest with you,
I didn't either, but I like that. Yeah. The fetus thing it was a bit of shock.
I was like, once I saw the fetus, I was like, you're gonna run, right? You should start running now. But I was like, I don't know if it's gonna work. Like you're kind of like screwed, But and that's what ended up happening. Like it's yeah, she did not get a raw deal. She got a raw deal there. But I think that was like one of the
stronger sequences
of the film. So
I agree with you. So it seems like after that, it's pretty much the film's wrapping up. But you take objection to the end writing with sequence between Lonergan and Mallory, Detective Mallory. Yeah, you said that you didn't quite like their sort of like how Lonergan is trying to console, trying to come up with these hypothetical situations. But you didn't quite buy it. You're like, come on, like the believability is just not there. But what I would say is, like, oftentimes when you're going through a traumatic event like that, you sort of just want to create this illusion that that could be possible, even if you know it's not. He's trying to comfort his friend who's gone through a lot, unknowingly he lost his child, but he knowingly for sure lost the mother of his child. And so he's going through a traumatic event. Oftentimes you just want to create this illusion of hopefully this alternative fantasy. So that in that sense, I do find it believable. Because even Mallory was like, yeah. But even Mallory said at the end, he's like, no. He's like, despite what Lonergan's trying to console him with all that, he's like, that's not what happened. He's like, because he knows it.
Yeah, I mean, my issue with it, like, I think where I can agree is like the intent that's believable, right? Comforting and like creating us. It's just that the stories he came up with, I was like, okay, this guy has to be really, really in denial to believe.
What other stories would you come up with for him? I mean, you have to do something, as cliche and as far-fetched as it was.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would start saying that she was speaking the truth and there was a monster. That's even more believable than his stories. Yeah, they were so bad. Like, oh, she's out there living in the mountains, like living off the land. I was like, yeah, okay, sure she is.
I did like, though, when they were doing that, like, to add to that, they showed like scenes of Trisha camping and then like scenes of them in these alternative sequences.
That was a good.
I thought those were good tricks.
Yeah. Those are good tricks. Yeah, I like those scenes, but I was just like, come on, this is like too much. Like, the
believability wasn't quite there, but the scenes, the way they actually showed, they cut to her camping or them walking together. I was like, okay, that's just like a good director's approach rather than just hearing them talk the scenarios through.
Yeah.
Those are some of the like little tricks where I was like, this helps the film, or at least in my view.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where I did feel like the film. To your point of the question, I didn't even think about any other stories that I guess he could have told them, but I mean, it's a tough situation because like it's like that's why I say like the police were doing their jobs. Like they just randomly disappear everybody. It's like they're really gonna blame everything on like bad drug bust or whatever. Also, like you said, the worst part was like they thought like Callie and then Walter's son was they're the real corporate. I was like, this is such a stretch. Yeah. That's one thing I think with horror films is that either they get us shrouded in so much mystery where like I'm so confused because I'm getting blitzkrieged, or it has to be like believable enough where I'm like, oh my goodness, it could be this, and like they leave it that doubt where you're like, oh my goodness, like I don't know, right? This one I was just like, I don't believe this, like, or that, like I don't even know like what's going on. Like it was an interesting film, but it was I guess. Before we get into final thoughts and ratings, I guess that was the only problem I had with the ending, because I will say this, the last 15, 20 minutes of that film I liked it. I like I said, that tunnel scene. I like the, kind of like the, maybe not the believability of the stories, but even like that ending scene. Like I thought the last 10 to 15 minutes of the film was actually pretty strong. That's why I say like, in the beginning that I liked part B versus part A a lot more,
See, I thought about the last 20 minutes was incredibly strong for the film. Even what you're saying between the cops, I even thought that sort of flowed together, really worked well. And then you see that apparition of Callie there, and he goes to investigate further, and she's not there, right? He thought it was just like a hallucination, but in reality, Callie is there looking, and you just see the little creature's hand on her shoulder. I thought that was a really strong way to end it.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there anything else you specifically want to talk about within this film, or should we go to final ratings?
I think we can go to final ratings, unless you have something else, and I can start off with the final rating.
Sure, I'll let you go this time.
Yeah. So this film, my rating is a 3.5 out of 10. So it's Rarsh. This is and I'm pretty harsh on movies, so this is not a film. So first, I'll say that this is not a film I'm going to be like recommending to people, I guess, in general. But yeah, I guess with these type of movies, because you gotta remember, like what I'm looking for here is I'm genuinely scared. I'm genuinely creeped out. It's getting me psychologically primed up. And there's moments it happens, like the bathroom scene's a great one. And even the tunnel, I wasn't really scared, but it was a well done scene. And even like you said, the basement scene with the darkness, I thought that was actually like there's three.
There were little tricks that you liked.
Exactly. But as a whole, I slept like a baby after this movie, and that's one of the things I do assess.
So you want to really scare? Okay.
And then even without that, right? Like, let's say I wasn't like really looking for the scariness. The writing at times was such as that I felt like it was basically this movie. I don't know what did it get into theaters or was this like a TV direct? I don't know this answer. Because I did feel like I was watching at times for sequences, basically a movie that went directly to TV. You know what I mean? Like
it could have been. Could have been.
I mean, you know what I'm talking about? The difference in quality of like a TV first movie and like let's say one that's like
has to do with budget too.
Yeah, in Cannes or in a film festival, even like not even like let's not even say AMC Blockbuster. Let's just say film festival type, right? Because there's some low budget ones that have hit film festivals, right? Mm-hmm. But this film, unfortunately, like it felt at times. To its credit, it didn't always feel this way, but at times it felt like I was watching a TV, a directly to TV movie, which actually has opened up my possibilities because I've been thinking. I have, like I said, I always like to say I have this bullpen of movies, but now I'm maybe gonna creep in a little TV movies, and we'll see how that goes.
Oh no! What you gonna recommend? Sharknado?
No, but there might be some other ones. We'll see. But that's my whole holistic take is that like the movie, like there were things I liked, and I actually give credit to, like I said, the performances I mentioned earlier with Kali and even the other detective, even though I think his writing was not the best, but even Trisha didn't too poorly, and I thought she did well. And like I said, it's I was able to watch it. It wasn't a movie that I had to like turn off, so horrendous. But I think
I don't know. 3.5 to me sounds horrendous.
I think with for me a horrendous score is like 1 or 0. So just letting you know.
You have like a weird like how most people's scores are like a normal distribution. Yours is like heavily skewed like to the left. Like most of your films are like up here, and you got to be like way over here, 0 1. We got to normalize your score, Chris.
Well, if you normalize my score, you basically have to always add like I think at least 2 points. So if I say it's an 8, then most people would say it's a 9 or 10, and I would say it's a 7. But it's so yeah, it's one of it's a film where like I said. So to wrap up and let you go, it's a shame because I do think that like you said with these tweaks or with a little bit more curation or love, I'll say. It's just easy like a film that I would have said like 6.5, 7, but it's tough for me to say that. Like I've been harsh on other movies, right? And I've been harsh on movies that most people consider cult classics or they really liked. For me to say like this is as good or I can rate it in the same tier even as like Cooley High, like it would be a disservice to that film. So I had to be consistent and say, look, it's a movie that's not even in that tier. So it's who knows? Maybe one day I'm gonna go negative, but I'll leave it at that. So.
You have an interesting rating system. For me, this film, I thought about this for a while because while I did like quite a few of the tricks, I could see the direction where Flanagan was going in his future works. There were some things that I couldn't do. I know you have to suspend your belief a little bit, but like for one, I just didn't like Mallory's like character. And I thought in that scenario, I was like, you could have tweaked the writing to like maybe make that a little bit better. Maybe suspended and just was trying to support her like on a personal basis, right? Not as an official cop. There were certain things that they probably could have done with a better budget in writing. I did not like one of my big negatives with this was I get that in a lot of these films you're going to have like apparitions, especially when you're being like haunted by something. But it was just seeing her like husband just in that state with his eyes. There were just so many, like, it was overused to me, where it wasn't scary. It just got like annoying and repetitive after a while. This is just my personal take on that. And by and large, like, some things were left unexplained. I get that was sort of the take, but I felt like they could have done a better job sort of introducing, like, with the metal in her bed. That was never really explained. How the heck the silver pieces got in her bed? Was it the monster? Yeah, maybe. But it was just weird as to why they would end up in her, like, under her sheets, right? And so there were a lot of little things like that that just kind of added up over time, where I was just kind of getting annoyed with some of the film, or like the director's choice. But I did like quite a few scenes in this film, like I mentioned before. But some of the bathroom scenes were some of the best. I liked the sort of panning from Trish's face into the abyss of darkness. I thought that was really good. I thought a lot of the tunnel sequences that we sort of reiterated were good. And I thought, like you said, the performances that you sort of highlighted as being actually pretty good, I did agree with. I thought that Callie, the actress that played Callie, I thought she did a phenomenal job, quite frankly. And her performance, and I liked quite a few of the sort of shots that were chosen, especially in the other tunnel sequences that we'd seen. Especially, there was a couple that kind of looked like they could have been like a security camera capturing the web. I thought those were good stylistic choices that Flanagan had. But overall, because of the sort of the pros and cons that I sort of felt, I'd give this film a 6.5. Where I think that it could have gone higher. I think if a lot of the sort of writing gaps and the some of the sequences, like like they cut out a couple of the sequences of, like, I remember one in particular when Callie's trying to pick out the dress, and you just see, like, she pans back, goes back to the dress, and then there's like the husband's like head sticking out of there in the closet. I was like, really? That wasn't necessary. Like, it was just it was like scene number 15 of that. I don't know. That was just my personal take.
No, it's fair. I think what I find interesting about your scores is that I think you tend to have a baseline. If you found the movie kind of like watchable, enjoyable, you tend to like rate it. Even though I found this watchable, I still hammered it. But
sorry. Well, I will say I think the budget did hamper it quite a bit. That was just me personally, though.
Yeah,
and I guess
I've been spoiled, so I don't find any excuses.
Okay, the number of money is definitely, like, helps your possibilities in terms of what you can and can't shoot. If you are a multi-million-dollar film and you have trash writing, I can't make any excuse for you. If you're $5,000, I can sort of see, okay, the workings were there. If you had a little bit more, you could have gotten to this point. So I have to give a little bit. I err a little bit. I know you don't cut fucking any. I'm sorry, you don't cut any slack. I know we try not to swear on this podcast. Try to keep it professional. But yeah, you don't try to. You don't cut any slack when it comes to any of these movies, any of the films that we sort of review. Also, for me, it's circumstantial.
We've done films where, like, Primer, Clerks, where I actually, if you have a lower budget and it's a higher degree of difficulty and you pull it off, I actually give you more points than the other way around, where, oh, well, you have an out? Well, no, thank you, dude. So
the degree of difficulty, like, on your tricks is higher.
Yeah, it's like if you pull those off, I'm giving you some more extra points.
More brownie points.
Not the other way around. Oh, it wasn't good on budget. Well, too bad. All
right. Well, I guess that's just personal choices.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's just personal, like, preferences and choices. I will still say, like, this movie, I was able to watch basically, like, I watched like 1 hour or 45 minutes and then 45 minutes. And there's been, like, we've done other movies that I've liked more, but that were more of a slog. So, it's one of those things where this is probably like a good, like, this is a good movie if, like, you're throwing like a Halloween party, you just need something in the background, like some people watch because you know how it is, right? Some people want to mingle, other people just want to, like, keep busy. This is a movie to have because, like, that's the thing, like, this is one of those movies where, like, if you miss, like, maybe some scenes, you're really not missing much. You just, like you said, we've talked about the scenes where like if you miss those,
But there could be a couple scenes where if you missed that we've highlighted, and you're like,
exactly. But like there's other scenes where I'm looking back now. I'm thinking right now as we're talking, I'm like, yeah, if I was at a party and I just missed the boring scenes, do I miss anything? Not really. Like other movies, like even other horror movies, like they set it up so it's like, oh no, I need to watch like everything. So it's one of those things that these movies do have their place. So, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, unless you have anything else to add, those are sort of our thoughts on this movie, Absentia. If you liked our film review analysis, please like and subscribe to our channel. And stay tuned for next week when we will be reviewing, this is Chris's choice, we'll be reviewing, I can't remember what year it came out, The Social Network, though.
2010.
2010 film, The Social Network, dealing with sort of, I believe the story of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook.